Americans for Prosperity North Dakota proudly supported important policy improvements that broke barriers for all North Dakotans this legislative session. From tackling unnecessary and burdensome occupational licensing standards to fighting for tax relief, AFP is proud to have played a part in improving the lives of North Dakotans this year. Join AFP today by visiting www.afpnd.org. This advertisement was paid for by Americans for Prosperity. Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I am your host, Rob Port. Later in the program, Congressman Kelly Armstrong takes your questions. We have an interesting discussion about Iran and flag burning and a lot of issues, so stay tuned for that. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about median age change over the last roughly decade. I know your eyeballs are probably rolling back up into your head and you think that this is just super boring, but it's interesting because North Dakota is the only state in the nation, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the only state in the nation over the last decade to have seen the median age shrink. North Dakota's median age went from is at 35.2 years in 2018. That's down from 37 years in 2010. That's below the median age in South Dakota, Minnesota, Montana. It means we're the youngest state in our region. We're the only state where that trend is going down. Every other state in the nation is seeing its median age go up. So what's happening? Why is North Dakota getting younger? Well, if we want to be glib about it, we can just say, well, it's the oil boom. And that's absolutely accurate. As a matter of fact, if you go to sayanythingblog.com, I wrote about this week. The U.S. Census provides a county-by-county breakdown, essentially a heat map, showing the areas, the counties in the country that have seen, the biggest drops in median age. And if you look at the map, obviously, it won't surprise you at all to see that the Bakken region is, sort of the oil field region of North Dakota and by the way, eastern Montana is, very much the region where they're seeing the median age drop the most here in North Dakota. But if you look across the nation, well, we're seeing a lot of places where, in all of the places, I should say all of the places, a lot of the places where we're seeing, a county by county drop in median age are around energy plays. Obviously the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota and Montana, the Denver Basin in Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Kansas, the Permian Basin in the West Texas Panhandle, even the North Slope of Alaska has seen a drop in the median age. And from a national perspective, I think that's extremely interesting because where have the opportunities in the national economy been over the last decade? Well, a lot of the opportunities have been in the energy industry. That's where a lot of the young people are growing. That's why we're seeing the population drop in all of these places and all of these counties that are surrounding energy activity. Again, the Permian Basin, the Denver Basin, the Bakken oil fields, the North Slope of Alaska. This is where the young people are going. That's where the opportunities are. I've actually argued a lot that the economy wasn't as bad as it could have been under President Obama. And in fact, a lot of the economic growth that he took credit for was driven by the oil industry, was driven by the energy industry, an industry that President Obama didn't really have much love for, but because of the shale boom, because of some things like lifting, the ban on oil exports. I mean, there were some things that did happen under the Obama administration, sometimes despite his administration. In the instance of lifting the oil ban, he deserves the ban on exporting crude oil. He deserves some credit for that. But generally, his administration was hostile to the energy industry. The energy industry thrived anyway because of market conditions and innovations like horizontal drilling and fracking. And that's created a ton of opportunities in the economy and really in a lot of ways served as a safety net for our economy. Things didn't get quite as bad as they could have gotten because our energy industry was resurgent. I mean, we're now to the point where the United States is the top oil exporter in the world, and I don't think we're done growing yet. We still have a lot of growth to go. For North Dakota, this means that some ugly population trends from the not-so-distant past have been reversed. One, obviously, our population decline. We are now at over 760,000 residents in the state of North Dakota. If you go back to 2008, we were at, or even go back a little further, maybe back to 2000, which was sort of a recent low, we were at 629,000. I mean, we've added just in the last 20 years, a median. We've added essentially an entire Minot, an entire city of Minot to the state's population in the last 20 years. That's a pretty good growth for a state our size. And what's more is it's growth in young people, which means that this growth is going to have ramifications for us long term. Because what's going to happen is those young people are going to come here and they're going to start families, and their kids are going to grow up here, and they're going to put down roots, and they're not going to want to leave. And their kids are going to grow up in North Dakota, and they're going to be North Dakotans. And that's a wonderful thing. It's hard for me at times to describe to people how much I love North Dakota. I wasn't born here. I was born in Anchorage, Alaska. I grew up. I spent the first 10 years of my life. I don't know if you could say you're grown up when you're a 10-year-old, but I spent the first 10 years of my life living in Wasilla, Alaska. When my family moved here, I resented it. I loved the mountains and trees. I wasn't real sure about the treeless prairie. And by the way, fun fact, when we were moving here, I thought North Dakotans were going to have southern accents. I thought they were going to say y'all. Because from the perspective of a little kid who lives in Alaska, North Dakota was the South. I remember telling my friends in Alaska that I was moving to the South, only when I got here, instead of a bunch of y'alls, I got a bunch of you betches. But it's my adopted home has grown on me. And my mother's side of the family has some very deep roots here. They emigrated here from Norway. And I love North Dakota now. I love this place. I think it's just a wonderful place to live. And it hurts me when I see other people make North Dakota the butt of jokes that were boring, that were desolate, and on and on. I think that's unfair. I think it's not true. I think this is a wonderful place, and I am excited that we've had opportunities in our state, thanks to the oil industry, that have attracted so many people here who are going to put down roots, so many people here who are going to have an impact on our state that is generational. The oil boom and what it does to the demographics of North Dakota, what it does to our economy long term, we're going to be living with the repercussions for decades to come, and they're mostly positive repercussions. The one thing we do need to do is prepare to have opportunities beyond the oil industry. The oil industry is great. The agriculture industry is great. I want to keep doing as much as we can in both of those areas, but we do need to diversify. We do need to have other opportunities so that next generation, all the people who came here for the oil boom and they put down roots and they had children, and we need opportunities for those children, both in the oil industry, in the agriculture industry, and beyond, to keep them here and to keep this pace up. Because again, North Dakota is a wonderful place, and we can grow and we can thrive. And I don't want to go back to the bad old days where our population was shrinking and getting older. But in the here and now, it's been the energy industry. The energy industry created a ton of opportunities that brought a ton of people to our state. And not just here, but across the country. It's been amazing. It's hard to describe. I mean, rarely do you look at sort of macroeconomic or macro social trends and be able to identify one variable that is so influential on the rest of the situation. I mean, sometimes we do it. We dumb down issues for the sake of, political discussions or media reports or whatever, but rarely is that the case. Yet in this instance, where have the opportunities been in the United States of America? Where have America's young people been flocking? Well, the energy industry. Despite all of the anger and rancor it creates, right? Remember all the opposition to the Dakota Access Pipeline, which has been hugely important to North Dakota's oil industry. So much so, they're looking at almost doubling the capacity for it. And by the way, there's other, pipeline projects in the work as well. And, North Dakota is going to need that pipeline capacity. And yet, all the political opposition to it from young people, by the way, which is kind of interesting. But the energy industry has been important. Things have been a lot better than they could have been during the dark economic times of the early Obama administration. Things could have gotten worse than they did. But the energy industry kept us afloat, and it's continuing to provide opportunities. And that's something to keep in mind the next time we're having a debate about a pipeline or fracking or flaring or anything about that. The economic and social impacts of this are profound, and they're important, and they shouldn't be ignored. My interview with Congressman Armstrong up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Congressman Kelly Armstrong joins me now. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Rob.
We got a few listener questions for you this week. And remember, as always, Congressman Armstrong's on every week. And you can send in your questions to rob@sayanythingblog.com. The first thing I got to ask you about is this situation with Iran. Breaking news overnight that President Trump was right on the cusp of a counterstrike against Iran for having shot down one of our drones, and then ultimately made the decision not to pull the trigger. I know it's still a developing story. I know President Trump has been tweeting out some of the process he went through to make the decision. As you're looking at this, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I think whenever you're dealing with these kind of issues, obviously things are moving in real time. And if the president thought that the risk of too many civilian casualties was too high and decided to pull the plug at the last minute, I think that shows incredible restraint. And this situation is going to not only developing today, but it's been developing for 30 years, 40 years, and is going to continue to develop. But I'm confident they'll do the right thing. The buildup of force presence over there is from everything I know, reasonable considering how we're dealing with these issues.
With Iran, I mean, what's the and again, this is the context of decades and decades of foreign policy, but in the here and now, I mean, are we going to go to war with Iran? I mean, there's a lot of, and it's really hard because it's a super heated partisan environment. I think some of the deference of partisan politics that we could rely on in past years when it comes to discussing these sorts of issues, we just can't rely on anymore. So we're discussing these hugely important, potentially on the cusp of war, and yet there's still a lot of the same sort of partisan pie throwing going on that surrounds every other topic that we talk about. So, what's the path forward on Iran?
That's the issue, right? Continuing to develop. I will say this: if strategic and proportional responses to things are things that I do think are in the purview of the executive branch. If we are going to put boots on the ground, I think regardless of how partisan you think this environment is, that's a decision Congress absolutely has to be a part of. But I think outside of the bright line that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon, I think everything in these decisions is a lot more nuanced than our hyper-political, not just congressional environment, also, media environment is willing to admit.
It just seems like it's difficult for anybody to make. I sometimes wonder what the rest of the world thinks looking in, whether it's President Trump trying to negotiate with China, even as there's a lot of backbiting going on, maybe behind him here in the United States, or trying to synthesize a both military and diplomatic response to an increasingly belligerent Iran. I wonder, all these people looking in, and democracy is always messy. I mean, it's for a lot of good reasons. We don't have a strong man at the top of our government. I just wonder sometimes how effective President Trump can be when there is just unprecedented levels of questioning of his authority even to make these decisions.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's 2 points that should be pointed out to that. One, they have a lot more information in the Situation Room than anybody in the general public does, including me as well. And two, that only in our current political environment can the president get blamed by the media for Iran. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, Iran's been the largest state sponsor of terror for decades. They're utilizing proxies to, you sugarcoat it however you want, but engage and attack American resources in the region. And they're a bad actor. They've been a bad actor for a long time. And so, but also at the same time, I don't think, I think the president showed, like I said, I don't have all the information, but it appears to me that everything that they were working through last night, it seems like there was a decision, and then there wasn't a decision, but not because there was indecision, because circumstances and data that he was provided with change. And I think that's how we want to address every one of these issues as they move forward.
I want to talk about something. There were hearings this week in the House about slave reparations or some sort of a program to pay back I guess the African American community for the atrocity, frankly, that was slavery. What are your feelings on this policy?
Yeah, I don't support this policy. I think first we need to recognize that slavery will be forever one of the major absolute humanitarian black stains on this country. We know that. We're moving forward, or we're working for it. But also at the same time, the policy in and of it's a non-starter for me. We need to continue to work forward. We need to continue to deal with racial issues in the 21st century and not go back to the 19th century.
I've always wondered how you even go back and unravel some of this. I mean, there are, situations where, one of the first individuals from Africa who was enslaved in the United States was himself later freed, and he himself owned slaves. Members of the Native American community owned slaves. If we're going to go back and try to calculate, who is descended from who and who is affected by slavery, I mean, are the descendants of a black slave owner going to have to pay the descendants of non-black slave owners? I mean, where does this end? I think
if you're a recent immigrant from Germany who came over here in the 1980s, or are from any other country, where do you fall into that spectrum? I mean,
right.
it's
My family didn't arrive here from Norway until the turn of the last century, well after slavery had been abolished. So what's my culpability in all of this? I think it's hard. I think you said it right. It's more about what we do going forward. We can't do anything about the past. We can't go back and make slavery a thing that didn't happen. What we can do is focus on everybody getting, the same opportunities and having the same chance at prosperity and happiness that the rest of us have. Aspire to that anyway. I don't know that we're ever going to achieve that perfectly, but that's what we should be working for going forward, because going forward is what we control. We can't control the past anymore. That's already happened.
And recognizing, when we deal with race relations and those things all across this country, it is an evolving process, and the work is never done, both at an individual level and, just ensuring that exactly what you said, we're promoting, the ability for every single American to have every opportunity to succeed.
I wanted to ask you as well, Senator Kramer signed on to a constitutional amendment to ban flag burning, or to allow the amendment would essentially give Congress the permission to pass laws against desecrating the American flag. Do you support that?
Yeah, if that ever is true, I think it's a curtail on First Amendment rights. So the only way I would support it, is if it was a constitutional amendment where voters voted to curtail their own right. I think you run into different issues. There's different countries. My wife's from Norway. They have very strict flag rules, and but you're dealing with T-shirts and bikinis and blankets, and the depiction of the American flag is used in a lot of different ways. Now, I will say this at a personal level: I think burning an American flag is absolutely abhorrent. I just think one of the greatest things about this country is that you have the ability, because of the First Amendment, to do some of those things, provided you're not placing people in danger and doing those things. That being said, if it's a constitutional amendment and the American people vote in favor of it, then the American people have voted in this very specific instance to curtail their own First Amendment rights, and that's the way a process like this needs to work.
That makes sense. So would you support it in Congress if it came your way?
I don't know. I haven't read it. I would have a difficult time with it, I think. As bad as I think the conduct is and as horrible as it is, First Amendment is the bedrock of what we deal with, and I'm not entirely sure that this is the most appropriate way to approach it. If they put it on the ballot as a constitutional amendment, that's a different matter.
Let's get to some listener questions. Kevin asks on Facebook, ask him if he was present for the 9/11 first responders vote. And I know we talked about this on a previous episode. I think you said you were there for an hour, but for the sake of this listener, do you want to describe? I'm assuming he's referring to the committee hearing that got so much attention with Jon Stewart's comments about Congress.
Yeah, I mean, it was a subcommittee hearing of judiciary.
Sure.
And we were there. I mean, I was there for the first hour of the hearing, and then I had a previously scheduled meeting with Senator Kramer, Senator Hoeven, and the new Deputy Attorney General dealing with an issue that was really important in North Dakota. And so I went to that meeting. And then, but I support the amendment. When it comes on the House floor, there will be a roll call vote. Everybody's going to be able to tell where their congressman all over the country was on that issue. And I expect it to pass very substantially on the House floor.
Kurt asks, I would like to know if he would sign on or support the Federal Retirement Fairness Act, which he says is H.R. 2478, which would allow for buying back some for some federal workers who are not considered career employees until later in life, although they were employed by the federal government.
I think what they're talking about is temporary workers who end up qualifying for federal pension. If their temporary time would count. Let's take a rural postal worker in North Dakota who may not work full time. My understanding of the legislation is that if you want to do that, you have to buy back, because if you're part-time, you're not necessarily paying into the pension either. So but my understanding is you have to buy back your time when you were on temporary, and then you would qualify. Nothing's absolute because I haven't read it. It's going to come in. I think it comes in front of oversight, and so we'll get more knowledge. But it sounds like something I will support. Ensuring that there's a buyback. I mean, there has to be a buyback, right? If you weren't paying in. But I mean, we have rural postal carriers that don't necessarily work full time, and that if through their career they end up qualifying, I think they should be able to buy back into their time.
Sure. Via Twitter, Nat asks, pro-life or pro-choice?
Pro-life.
Easy enough. What do you think? There's certainly been a rash of state legislatures, and it's hard. The politics of the abortion issue are so difficult because obviously the court has weighed in. There's precedent there. A lot of this is a question of, is the court going to change that precedent or not? I don't know what Congress's role in that, but certainly we've seen a number of state legislatures across the country, including some Democratic-led state governments, or at least one anyway, Louisiana, basically passing increasingly restrictive abortion laws. I mean, are you supportive of this movement? Do you see Congress having a role in any of that? Congress should. I mean, the Born Alive Protection Act, I think, is something Congress absolutely could act on. I'm proud to be a member of that. We're trying to do that. Dealing with that issue. Obviously, there was a late-term abortion bill last Congress that didn't get through. I think there are places for that. But this is where this goes, is the states. And I think as you see this, you will see the Supreme Court. And everybody talks about Roe v. Wade. The real case is Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And as medical technology advances, I think what we have deemed as a viability 40 years ago and what we deem as viability now, just medical breakthroughs alone, that answer has changed. So I do anticipate, this will be taken up by the Supreme Court, and I go back to my original answer. I'm pro-life. So states are the way to do this. I also think that people sometimes forget in this argument that this is also, it's a human rights issue first and foremost. We always have to talk about it that way. But it really truly is a states' rights issue. If Planned Parenthood v. Casey or Roe v. Wade got overturned tomorrow, that doesn't mean abortion is illegal from sea to shining sea in the United States. It means states will determine what their laws are. Right. Kelly, thanks for your time. Thanks, Rob. That's it for today's Plain Talk Podcast. Thank you, as always, for listening. If you want to follow me on social media, you certainly can. Rob Port, Say Anything Blog. Search for him on Twitter or Facebook. You'll find him. And if you give me a follow, you'll be able to track all the latest columns and blog posts and podcast episodes and interact with me on the issues of the day. if you've got a mind for that sort of thing. Also, if you want to ever give me any feedback on the show or send me any questions for our weekly guest, Senator Kramer, Congressman Kelly Armstrong. And by the way, we had a little bit of a snafu with some of the scheduling with Congressman Armstrong and Senator Kramer. I'm sure you probably noticed. We'll get back to the regular schedule soon. Just some technical days, my fault, but just some technical difficulties on my end that I was working out. One of which, by the way, was some tree cutting that was going right outside the window of my office when I was supposed to be recording an interview. And, sometimes I only get, small windows. They're so generous with their time, making themselves available to me every week, but I only get small windows. And if I can't hit that window, then we're kind of out of luck. But we'll get back to the regular schedule soon. Thanks for everybody who emailed about it. I certainly appreciate your feedback. Speaking of feedback, if you're listening to this podcast on a platform that allows you to rate or review, if you would do so, I would sure appreciate it. Every new honest rating and review really helps. The algorithms helps other people find this podcast, so that's always helpful. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.